Good evening, everybody. I appreciate everyone being here this afternoon on Good Friday. We are here today for a debate between the candidates running for Hancock County Prosecutor in the May 6th primary. Over the next hour, they will make their case for why they deserve your vote on Election Day. My name is Dave Hill. I'm editor of the Daily Reporter, and I will be your moderator this evening. Let's take a minute and meet the two candidates. I'll start with my far right. Incumbent Michael Griffin is running for his second term as Hancock County Prosecutor. He was first elected in 2010. Mr. Griffin's legal career spans more than 20 years, including stints as a Judge Advocate General as a reservist in the United States Army. The challenger to my near right is Mr. Brent Eaton. Mr. Eaton is a former deputy prosecutor who for the past 7 years has worked as a defense attorney, mostly in the Marion County court system. He also was a deputy under former Hancock County Prosecutor Larry Gossett, and that was in the early 2000s, 2003 to 2006.
Yes.
I had to look that up. During our debate tonight, each candidate will answer a series of questions. I have a set of questions here. We just talked about the option to submit questions as well. If you'd like to pose a question to the candidates at any time during the debate, raise your hand and we'll find you and give you a chance to jot down a question. Those little slips of paper, like I said, will make their way up here and we'll consider adding them into the mix. I think probably at the halfway point of the debate, I'll pause for a second and give everybody a chance to raise your hand. I'll remind everybody at that point, if you've got a question, we'll collect them then. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes for opening and closing statements, as well as 2 minutes to respond to questions. Rebuttal time of 1 minute per candidate per question will be allowed, and I also may ask follow-up questions to get clarification on your answers. I will ask everyone to please silence your cell phones and to show the candidates the courtesy of your attention by holding applause until the end of our debate this evening. By prior arrangement of a coin flip, Mr. Griffin will give his opening statement first, followed by Mr. Eaton. Mr. Griffin, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate seeing you here. This election is a choice between moving forward and, most frankly, moving backward. My office has been moving forward now for almost 4 years. When I was elected in 2010, I ran on a platform of rebuilding the prosecutor's office after 8 years of neglect. I went to work immediately engaging and partnering with our community, including partnering with our 4 school corporations on an educational neglect initiative, with the fire departments on an arson task force, and with the police agencies on a sexual assault response team. More than that, we've started a comprehensive child support program and have been pursuing the creation of a child advocacy center. In the middle of doing all of those things, I've remained very active in our criminal cases. My very first case was before I took office. I was a deputy Henry County prosecutor serving in the State versus Sue Ann Vanderbeck case, which is better known as the case of the woman who killed Officer Will Phillips. As soon as I took office, I transitioned as a co-counsel role, and from there I've prosecuted a wide variety of cases, including Michael Robinson, Colby McNelly, Martin Hensley, Miranda Luker, Steve Harding, Charles Ake, 117 deadbeat parents in felony non-support cases, and many more. At this point, we have a team that is now well established and working as a well-oiled machine. And the best statement I can make about their accomplishments is that our team has won every single high-profile case in this county in the last 3.5 years. Almost no county in the state can say that, but we can. We're not done. There's plenty more to do. You can't fix 8 years of neglect in 4 years' time, and we know that, and we're still working to make improvements. We're committed to a philosophy of continuous improvement, and we're improving every day. All of the advances and achievements, however, are at risk. And this is because the other choice would break up a high-functioning and successful team, has no commitment to doing the things that we've done, and has no record of accomplishment like the one we have. The other choice is to go backward. I am asking you to make the best choice for you and for your family and your county, and to continue moving forward, voting for me and my team on May 6th. Thank you.
Mr. Eaton, your opening.
Having a prosecutor that's never had a jury trial makes about as much sense as having a sheriff who never made an arrest. It's actually worse than that because there's 6 lawyers in the prosecutor's office. There's about 30 some odd deputies on the sheriff's department which are involved in law enforcement. And so it's substantially more likely that you're going to have a elected prosecutor go to court and actually try a case to a jury than it would be that you'd have to have the elected sheriff go out and arrest people. But the problem's really bigger than that. It's bigger than a manpower issue. You see, if you have a sheriff that's made arrest, then he's been on the scene. He understands issues of officer safety. He understands trying to develop probable cause. He understands trying to gather evidence. He understands writing reports. And those are all things that then he brings to the table for his leadership of the department. And so when he puts in policies and procedures in place, he does so from a position of experience. Unfortunately, that's not the case with the prosecutor's office. I think we may have the only elected prosecutor in the state of Indiana who has never tried a case to a jury. It's about priorities. In life, you find time to do those things which are important to you. Since his election in 2010, he has found time to get a master's degree in philosophy. He has found time to litigate to the election board to get people kicked off the Republican ballot who wanted to be delegate. He has found time to send fundraising emails out to people during those hours in which the prosecutor's office is open. He has found time to post political Facebook messages during the time when the prosecutor's office is open for business, but he has not found time, not once, to walk across the street, to walk into court, and to try a case in front of a judge or a jury. As the lead chair of that particular case, it's really about priorities. It's about having victim services which require the statutory obligations we have in the state of Indiana. It's about getting rid of the supplemental pay and having a prosecutor that will be active and involved in the courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to the beginning of questioning. What I didn't mention when we were talking about the opening statements is that the order also determines the opening of questions. So by virtue of going last, Mr. Eaton gets the first crack at the first question. I think throughout the course of the debate, you'll each get probably an equal number of first responses. So we're off to a really good start. Let me just kind of start by, well, let's just wade right into the issue that you were just raising, Mr. Eaton. This sounds kind of familiar because 4 years ago in an event very similar to this one over at the Ricks Theater, you attacked Mr. Griffin for his lack of courtroom experience. I think a lot of people would probably agree with you back then. He'd worked mostly at that point as a tax attorney and had done virtually no work in civilian criminal courts. Now, however, 3+ years into his first term, you're still making the same argument. I guess what I would like to ask you to do is kind of zero in a little bit more on that argument that after 3+ years, the elected prosecutor does not have the requisite experience to do the job.
I'd be happy to. Around central Indiana, when you go to Hamilton County, Lee Buckingham's the prosecutor. I know Lee. Lee has tried cases in front of a jury. In Shelby County, Kent Apsley is a prosecutor. Kent has tried cases in front of a jury. In Marion County, Terry Curry is a prosecutor. He has tried cases in front of the jury. The reason why it's important is every organization has something ultimately that they produce. In the case of the prosecutor's office, what you produce is cases that are ready for jury trial. If you have never done that, you are going to have a challenge in trying to make sure the office is prepared to do that. But it's really much deeper than that. Because to be able to do your job, you must understand what it is you're trying to do. And in this case, it's really pretty simple, is that somebody on the stage today has gone to trial and had cases for battery, and somebody hasn't. Somebody has tried cases for operating while intoxicated, somebody hasn't. Somebody has tried A, B, C, and D felony cases, and someone else hasn't. It is important because when the police officers call you, you want to be able to base the decisions that you make off of experience. When you're trying to make a decision on if to charge or not to charge something, you don't want to think academically how it may happen. You want to think in real-world terms, what is the correct, right decision based upon the experience that you've had. That's why it's important.
2 minutes, Mr. Griffin.
Well, Mr. Eaton is either misrepresenting or ill-informed. Either case, it's very disturbing. I have tried before federal panels as a judge advocate in the United States Army. And Mr. Eaton should be aware of that from 4 years ago. Perhaps he does not recall that. But a federal panel has many of the kinds of procedural issues and questions that a state panel does. And I'm disappointed to hear him speak in these terms because obviously military service is valued, and so are the kinds of experiences that it brings. It's well known that litigation experience is very well learned and earned in the United States military. Beyond that, he misrepresented my record in the opening, though he tried to save himself. I have tried a case here before the bench, and that's very obvious, and it's the murder case that we tried this last year. It's the most prominent case. He's never prosecuted a murder. He's never prosecuted anything above a D felony, and he only has 37 D felonies to his credit. Prosecuting a case is fundamentally different than defending it. Prosecuting requires covering the waterfront of all issues and facts that are involved in the case. The defense attorney merely finds 1 or 2 openings, or perhaps more if the case is bad, to try to attack, and that's it. He has spent more time as a defense attorney than as a prosecutor, and to use an analogy on his terms, voting for a defense attorney to be your prosecutor is like the chickens voting for Colonel Sanders. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
Would you like a minute?
Sure. And I've spent more time being a prosecutor than you have. The issue with trying to find the holes in a case, well, first of all, you have to know what the case is about and if the case is going to be made before you're going to understand if there's going to be difficulty with it. It's funny to hear somebody that's never had to do the job criticize the job. As far as the McNelly case, I'd be happy to talk about that case because that case went to bench trial. When it was filed, there was 135 years of liability. The 20 of those counts were D felony counts for invasion of privacy. The state of Indiana made the decision to dismiss all 20 of those counts, which was essentially 60 years of liability, in exchange for having that case be a trial to a judge, not to a jury. And so, you know, what I said is true. We may have the only elected prosecutor in the state of Indiana that has never tried a case to a jury.
1 minute.
Again, he's incorrect. I've done that before federal panels, so he persists in his misrepresentations. Beyond that, he's never encountered a defendant like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or any of the other sorts of defendants I've had to deal with.
We'll move on to the next question. Let me just back up a little bit and maybe cool off the emotions some. This next question will be for Mr. Griffin. You have first crack at this one. I'm just going to ask you to describe the proudest moment of your legal career so far.
There are several. I think that the one that means most to me was during the McNelly trial at the end when the verdict was about to be read. I had the opportunity to sit at counsel table, but I didn't do that. I went back to sit next to Lana Goebel and hold her hand and to talk to her a little bit and try to calm her before the verdict was read. And I was very pleased to be able to have that opportunity to comfort her and to address her concerns and to be present with her when she heard the verdict. That moment was very, very vivid for both of us, and she was very kind later to send a very, very heartfelt note that memorialized that for me, and I think that is really the rewarding part of what I do. It's about helping people. It's not about wins and losses and those sorts of things. It's not about technical, did I try this before a jury or a judge or some of those sorts of things. It's more about getting the results. People want results. This is not a game of figure skating where we try to judge the style points. This is about getting justice for real people.
Mr. Eaton, what's the proudest moment of your legal career so far?
When I think it was maybe 2004, and at that time I'd never had a jury trial before. And there was a case involving a domestic battery here in the county, and I was a prosecutor, and the defendant had a relatively lengthy criminal history, and the victim was scared, and I'd never had a jury trial before. And frankly, I was, it was intimidating. It was intimidating to think about doing something new and different with, the stakes as they were. And I spent a lot of time preparing and working on the weekend with the victim and with people that were close to her so that we could be prepared for trial, because we knew the defense would do their job. And ultimately, we were able to acquire a conviction for her, and we were able to acquire, the maximum sentence for the defendant. And since that time, she's moved on, and she's moved on from that relationship to have a positive life and to really do quite well for herself. And more than anything else that I've been able to do in my legal career, that's a particular case that really, really sticks with you, because I've been able to keep in touch with her over the years.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any rebuttal time?
Not to that.
Okay. Mr. Eaton will take the first response to our next question. The issue of drug enforcement has burst into discussion in the sheriff's campaign and also in yours here the last couple of weeks. The debate has seemed to center on whether committing resources to going after drug dealers, whether they're local level or more significant people in the drug trade, is the best use of resources. Where do you stand in that debate?
Well, the job of the prosecutor is going to be to work with the sheriff, whomever the sheriff may be. And it's going to be important for our community that the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's office have a positive working relationship. That being said, as a prosecutor, you want to try to take a leadership role and work with law enforcement to curtail criminal activity to the best that you possibly can. And, if that means that there would be a drug task force and that then there would be a need for manpower, know-how, or other support in that particular capacity, we'd be excited to be ready to do that. If you look at it, you given the number of people that have passed away due to drug crimes and given the rise in burglaries and other things around the county, it seems that drug enforcement should be a priority. And I think that that's something that I look forward to working with the next sheriff with when we get to, when we start to work together at the beginning of the year. The prosecutor's function there is to be supportive and to help make sure things function well, efficiently, and that we don't have any kind of miscommunication between the right hand and the left hand. It's something I'm experienced with. I've had a lot of drug cases as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and I look forward to bringing that experience forward so we can do a good job in trying to protect the people of the county by working together.
Mr. Griffin?
Well, I've been on record to this already, but to go ahead and put it in this forum, I'm very much in favor of a drug task force. It's essential. We've seen the number of investigations drop precipitously since the drug task force was eliminated. And that's a serious mistake, because all of the kinds of crimes that fuel drug activity are the kinds of crimes that hurt people most: the home invasions, the burglaries, the robberies. It goes on and on and on. And the overdoses that have tripled in this county over the past 4 years, it's just a very difficult circumstance. We've got to have a drug task force, period. No question about it. We're prepared, we're ready, we want to do that. The tools for that don't lie in a particular office holder's hands. It lies with a body called the county council. And the county council is constrained by a lot of budget priorities and difficulties. There has been discussion at that level about reinstituting it, but it does require cooperation among the prosecutor, the sheriff, and the county council to accomplish that. And of course, to put in safeguards that would hopefully avoid the kinds of issues that we experienced in 2010. But we are very much in favor of that. I want to mention, I think this is important to say, that the prior administration, the one immediately before mine, was resistant to drug prosecutions. And so we find in our records 31 investigations of drug crimes that were not prosecuted. In our administration thus far, there have been 3. We have been very open to prosecuting drug crime, and we try to take every opportunity possible to do that.
Would you like a minute to rebut?
No.
Okay. You look like you're getting ready to say something, so.
I'm just anxiously waiting for your next question.
Okay. Okay, well, you'll have to wait 2 minutes because Mr. Griffin gets the response to this next one. While we're on the topic of filing lots of cases, you mentioned, Mr. Griffin, filing many more drug cases than historically.
A higher proportion.
Higher proportion, thank you.
Of what's brought to us.
Let me just explore that with you for a second, because when you first ran for office in 2010, you promised that you would aggressively file charges whenever the police brought you, I'm going to say, a sound case. Obviously, you wouldn't file a charge if it seemed kind of holy, but now exact figures are difficult to come by, but you do seem to have kept that promise. I think it's fairly safe to say that your office has filed many more cases.
Thank you, Dave.
Than your predecessor. The question is this: how do you maintain a balance between serving the public's interest and creating a workload that risks an unmanageable caseload and an overcrowded docket?
Could you restate that last part? I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at.
What I'm asking is whether in the process of filing all of those cases, are you creating an unmanageable workload for your staff and for the court system? And does it also risk, I
think I know where you're going. Let me try, and then we'll
Okay.
see with follow-up questions if that's where you want. Well, obviously, our county has grown over the last couple of decades, and yet our number of deputy prosecutors has remained fairly stable. There was an addition of a prosecutor in 2007 under the Dobbins administration, but it's remained the same number since then, a total of 6. And so what we have done in our administration so far is twofold. One is that as far as my own involvement, I am personally involved in all of our non-support felonies. So that initiative is not one that falls primarily on our deputy prosecutors. It falls primarily on me, and I manage that capacity myself with my own time. My predecessors, each of the 2 of them, were not so personally involved in a caseload. And then beyond having personal involvement, we've also worked sometimes overtime with the resources that we have. We have approached the county council for an additional deputy prosecutor. We have been turned down. And so what we're attempting to do right now is to structure our budget and to arrange it such that in future years, hopefully in the next term, we would be able to hire an additional deputy prosecutor. But we do have a burgeoning caseload, one that involves many more investigations we consider than had been in the past, and has been very, very time-consuming.
Let me just ask you a quick follow-up. Maybe this will get more to the heart of what I was trying to ask the first time. Do you see your philosophy changing in a second term based on your experience with bringing so many cases?
No, I don't see that changing at all. I think we're on the right path. The ultimate answer is to serve the people, and that is by deterring crime and also by serving victims. Every case not filed has the potential of a victim not served, and we can't have that. We can't, it's intolerable. So what we do is try to manage our time the best that we can. Sometimes that results in overtime. My chief deputy and I are state-paid employees, so our time is not subject to overtime, for example, or comp time, and we have both worked extremely hard. I think it's fair to say my chief deputy has worked more hours than her predecessor. I know that I have worked more hours than my predecessor. So we've put in the time to try to balance that. But there does come a point, I think, and you're saying this, there does come a point where the growth of the county, the growth of crime that comes with it, results in a work capacity that is difficult to balance with the number of employees, no doubt. No doubt. The future is going to include an additional court at some point, an additional deputy or 2. and others. It's inevitable. By the way, every county around us has more courts than we do. Every one of them. Henry County, a population of perhaps 2/3 of our size, has 4 courts. We have 3. And this is an issue that's not just a prosecutor's issue. This is a court case management issue as well.
Thank you. By virtue of having asked you a follow-up in the middle,
Sure.
I will give Mr. Eaton 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes if you need that much time to respond.
All right. Actually, Mr. Hill, data is relatively easy to come by to get an accurate reflection of what the caseload is. And I've had the opportunity to do that with data from the Hancock County Clerk's Office. The time when I was in the prosecutor's office were the years 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006. The year 2003, there were a total of 2,336 criminal cases that were filed. The year 2004, that number was 2,458. The year 2005, it was 2,690. And in the year 2006, it was 2,336. Those are criminal cases that were filed in each of those years. And that was a prosecutor's office that had 5, not 6 deputy prosecutors. Beginning in 2011, total criminal cases filed would be 1,903. 2012 would be 1,755. 2013 would be 1,731. The average number of cases filed on an annual basis criminally between 2011 and 2013 with 6 attorneys on staff would be 1,796. Between 2003 and 2006, when there were 5 attorneys on staff, the average number of criminal cases filed on an annual basis was 2,454. And so the idea that somehow, we're in uncharted territory having more attorneys and fewer cases is simply not accurate.
A rebuttal. Mr. Eaton's response is very much rooted in his experience as a Superior 2 deputy because there, for example, are no sex offenses brought in that court. And as a comparison, in my term so far, the first 3 years we have filed 39 sex offenses. The entire term of my predecessor, he filed 28. Sex offense cases are extremely time-consuming. Assisting the victim and the family, encouraging them to report, to be part of the case, to continue to pursue it. It's an extremely wrenching process for a victim of a sex crime to be able to come into court and to testify about what has happened. That is probably the most time-consuming kind of case that we have. And like I say, already in 3 years' time, we have 50%, increased by 50%, all of the number that were filed in the prior term. So we're talking about quantity versus quality. The types of cases that we are bringing are cases that are far more time-consuming, time-intensive, and risky, frankly.
Time.
1 minute.
Operating while intoxicated cases are important. Domestic battery cases are important. I didn't work for his predecessor. I can only speak about the time when I was there. And the bottom line is that we did, in fact, file substantially more criminal cases on an annual basis by virtue of the data we have from the clerk's office. To say anything else is being disingenuous. Thank you.
I'm going to take just a real quick break and invite anybody who has any questions that they have written down to pass them to...
Mr. Hill, do I have opportunity for rebuttal to that?
I'll tell you what, yes, I'll give you an extra minute. Go
All
ahead.
right, if I may.
But Mr.
Well,
Eaton will also get
to
an extra minute.
Yes, to the
If he
point
wants
that it's disingenuous. That's exactly what I was trying to say, though in kinder terms, about what Mr. Eaton was saying. He doesn't have a breakdown of the types of cases that were being brought in that term, my predecessor's term, or my term. He's not offered anything like that. And so, sure, you can count the number of tickets, you can count the number of misdemeanors, all of which matter. But you have to be mindful that various kinds of cases require various kinds of preparation, experiences that Mr. Eaton does not have. Not at all. He's not prepared a sex offense case for prosecution. I have.
This will be the last rebuttal to the rebuttal to the rebuttal.
Again, there's one person that's sitting here that's actually tried cases in front of a jury, and that person's me. To hear somebody that hasn't ever done that talk about preparation is confusing to me. The idea that I was talking about infractions is not correct. I was very specific. It is criminal case filings year by year. The numbers speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to the next question. Mr. Eaton will have the first response for this one. And this is somewhat related to the kind of the underpinnings of our discussion so far, based on where your campaign is headed, where it's been and where it's probably headed the last 2 weeks. Mr. Eaton, Mr. Griffin has criticized you for your lack of recent experience in practicing law in Hancock County. I'll refer you to his campaign's Facebook page, where he writes, "My opponent does not focus his practice in Hancock County. In fact, he's not eligible to receive public defender appointments in Hancock County. He's not a member of the Hancock County Bar Association, and he doesn't even have an office in Hancock County." To what extent is that relevant to your ability to be prosecutor?
Give me just 1 second, please. There's something I'm looking for. If you can give me a second. Here it is. When, as you're probably familiar, a lot of times when people begin private practice, what they'll do is they'll go to the public defender's office to begin to pick up cases, and that's kind of how they'll build their caseload. Well, I never did that because I always knew I wanted to be prosecutor. If you have a public defender caseload, you're going to have a large number of cases in a particular jurisdiction, and with that, it's going to come cross-examination. It's going to put me on the other side of the relationships that I built from living here my entire life and from the relationships I built while I was in the prosecutor's office. And so, at some expense to myself and to my family, I never went to try to become a public defender because I knew I always wanted to be prosecutor. The idea about and in fact, in support of that, I've got an email right here from John Apple indicating that I never did, in fact, apply, but I would be eligible if I were to apply. And so the idea that I'm not connected to the community or there's something nefarious, and that's the reason why I'm not a public defender, simply is not accurate. It's important to me to only be a part of organizations in which I can take an active role. I have a multi-county practice. I spend time in Marion County, Hamilton County, Shelby County, Hancock County, occasionally Henry County or Hendricks County. And so on any given week, I may be in 2 or 3 different counties in different courts. And knowing that, it's not very frequent that I would be here at lunchtime when the Bar Association here would have its meetings. And I did not want to be a part of an organization if I could not actively contribute to it. And so I've lived here my entire life. This is where I went to school. It's where my family's lived for going on 40 years. It's where my children go to school. And this is the community that's my home. And I look forward to having the opportunity to serve the community where I grew up and that I care about so much. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, 2 minutes.
I probably don't need to point it out, but there's a very obvious paradox in what he's saying. He says that he always wanted to be a prosecutor, and yet he spent the past 7 years as a defense attorney. And this really does not jive with a lot of the kinds of statements he makes about wanting to be a prosecutor. It's not that he wants to be a prosecutor. He wants to be the prosecutor. His heart is not in the state's case. His heart is in being the top man. And we've seen that again and again. In the past couple of elections, plus this one, he has changed his position and the kinds of things that he wants to accomplish again and again and again to fit the election cycle. Not because there's one solid theme of a consistent passion that he wants to pursue. And so there's nothing evident in his resume, in his career track, or in his statements, frankly, that are indicative of his desire to be on the part of the state.
1 minute.
I would say that foregoing potentially tens of thousands of dollars in revenue so that I could preserve the relationships I have in the law enforcement community is a pretty strong statement as to how strongly I feel about trying to become prosecutor and do a good job for the people in this community. this is home. It's always been home. And I think that this office would be well served by having a prosecutor who's actually had jury trial experience. When I left the prosecutor's office, what I wanted to do and what I've continued to do is to try to make myself a better lawyer. I've tried to make myself a better lawyer by litigating difficult cases and by getting as much experience in the courtroom in as quick of time as I possibly could so I could bring those experiences back. Having had experience on both sides of the courtroom, I think I'm in a better position to anticipate difficulties a case may have, and that's one of the skills I hope to bring to the prosecutor's office. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, would you like another minute?
Just briefly, I've heard this argument about having experiences on both sides of the courtroom. The fact is there's really no experience you can have as a defense attorney that can make you better as a prosecutor. And the fact is that the skills that you have as prosecutor are perishable. They're ones that are not practiced, then would become... Mr. Hill, if we could have order, please.
Just 1 second. I would admonish members of the audience, please, to keep your voices down so that the candidates can share their thoughts. This event, after all, is about them. I'm sorry, continue.
Thank you very much. The skills of a prosecutor are perishable. These need to be practiced continuously to become and remain focused and sharp. The fact is he's not prosecuted a case in 7 years. And he doesn't have a good explanation for that. There are a lot of different explanations around that to say, well, I've defended and I've been in all these counties and gosh, I can't come home for lunch and all those sorts of things, but they don't really get to the heart of I have this desire and it's demonstrated that I want to prosecute cases. It does not exist in his record.
We're going to move on to the next question. You both had a chance to rebut the original statements as a reminder. The next question will go to Mr. Griffin. In September of last year, Elizabeth Roberts shot her husband to death in their Hancock County home after she became convinced that he was going to violently confront police officers. Mr. Griffin, in coming days, you would decide not to charge Mrs. Roberts in connection with that shooting. That was a decision that a number of law enforcement officials disagreed with at the time. This is arguably the most controversial case to have come through your office in the past 3 years. I'm going to ask you to kind of rewind and think about the events of that day and also the thought process that you engaged in as you made the decision not to file charges and defend that decision.
Definitely. There is a lot of experience in military practice to teach rules for the use of force and also to apply those when various situations arise. So when I came to this case, these kinds of considerations were not new to me. I had taught the rules and I had also had an opportunity to assess them with respect to service members who might potentially have violated them and committed crimes. These rules do vary a little from the Indiana rules, but nonetheless, it's the same feel. It's very familiar to me, and particularly as a life member of the NRA, it's something that I care very much about. As I approached them and looked at the facts were that in the basement of that home, there was a .50 caliber M2 weapon pointed at the stairway, loaded and ready to fire. It was done in that fashion for one purpose, and that was to shoot those who would come down those stairs. It's not hard to imagine who was about to come down those stairs. As we consider the time frame, the timeline, and I don't have the exact times, but the times were fairly narrow between when Ms. Roberts reported initially to police, when she returned to home, when the response by police was in progress, and when she shot her husband. The question was, did she shoot in defense of others? Now, there are various people who can argue about that. Certainly law enforcement can argue about that. I will tell you, many road officers were very glad about the decision I made and personally congratulated me, both by email and in person. because they knew, had the response been executed, that they would have been the ones who would have gone down those stairs and faced that weapon. There's no doubt in my mind or in the minds of most people that she saved lives that day. The question comes down for many people to a reading of the technical requirement of whether she was defending others and whether an attack was imminent. And various people can agree or disagree. Obviously, there is not one opinion about it because there were both sides arguing that point, but that is the decision that I made.
Let me stop you right there.
Yes.
Give Mr. Eaton his 2 minutes. We'll come back to you if you want rebuttal time. Mr. Eaton?
In my discussions with law enforcement, they are of a mind that, from what they have told me, that they would have liked to have seen a grand jury sort out that decision. And I think what bothers them the most is that the facts never were given a public hearing, and that investigators and police officers have a lot of time and a lot of knowledge and experience of dealing with difficult cases, were not able to ever bring that case forth to have it be considered. And that's something that I think that they were disappointed in. And it's something that when you have, the prosecutor in a lot of ways has absolute power on those things. And it is something that clearly was a difficult decision, but I also think it's something that should have been given an open hearing. When we have highly controversial issues that involve, controversial things, I think that maybe it's a good idea to get some input from the public before we make a final decision. Obviously, you can't do that with a grand jury with every single case because the caseload will not allow it. But when you have those cases of particular concern or of a highly controversial subject, it would seem that that would be an area where the use of a grand jury may be appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, did you want to pick up where you left off?
I do, yes. Well, first off, before we could have convened a grand jury, Ms. Roberts committed suicide. So the point about a grand jury is about the most moot point we can discuss tonight. Not only that, but to represent the opinion of law enforcement as unified is a mistake. That is not a unified opinion. There is definitely a segment of law enforcement that believes what Mr. Eaton said. There are other segments who are very satisfied with the decision that was made. There are others who, frankly, have not made a settled opinion about it because there were features of it that were difficult to resolve.
Mr. Eaton?
No, there's no need. We can proceed.
You get first crack at the next question, which deals with what you were touching on with your responses to the previous question. That's about the support of law enforcement. In recent elections, that's been really critical to actually winning the race. It seems like the endorsement of police officers and police chiefs really helps influence the outcome of the election. But a close working relationship after the election is important as well. And again, Mr. Eaton, you have first crack at this. How would you characterize your relationship with the law enforcement community today? And do you have their confidence that you're the best person for the job?
Well, as Mike described a minute ago, the law enforcement community is not a solid block. There's different people that have different opinions. Just like any group of reasonable people, sometimes they may reasonably disagree about some things. In this particular case, I've never sought out endorsements of law enforcement officers to run for office because my goal is to have a working relationship with all the law enforcement officers after the election is over with. If you go and you begin to inject politics into the criminal justice system, I think it's a dangerous thing. And it's something that I want the people that are filing cases to know if I make a decision to file or to not file a case, it's going to be based only upon what the facts and what the evidence is and what the law is. And so I intentionally have gone out of my way to be respectful and to talk to and get the input from my friends in the law enforcement community, but I've never asked them for endorsements because I don't want to put them in a spot where maybe they're going to have a tough case the next week and maybe it's going to have to go to the incumbent prosecutor's office and maybe that would be potentially a problem. And so I don't want to create an issue like that. My job is to try to create the best working relationship with law enforcement community that I possibly can. And that's not done by trying to put them in the middle of a political fight. I know that, you know, the opinions there are varied, but I have confidence from the conversations I've had and from the people I know that people that work in law enforcement view me as a trustworthy ally that they can count on to get things done. And I look forward to working with them in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin?
2/3 of what Mr. Eaton just said are not true, because heads of law enforcement have come to me telling me that he has asked for their endorsement. It's not that he's never asked for one, it's just that he's never gotten one. I'm endorsed by 3 of our chiefs of police and by a number of rank and file law enforcement officers. I'm very pleased that they support us. They have a stake in this. This is not about some muddle-minded notion that, well, we just can't involve them in politics. It's not about politics for them. It's about who they can work with and trust and have at their side for the coming 4 years. They want to know that the right person is in that job, and they care very much to be involved in that. Now, there are some who do view this as politics and want to stay away, but that's not the majority of them. The majority of them very much want to be involved and to have influence, let their friends and neighbors know who they think the best candidate is. And there's really probably not a better judge of who a good prosecutor is than the endorsement of someone in law enforcement. Those are the people who see us deal with our cases. They know whether we file them. They know whether we pursue them. They know whether we serve victims, because they're on the front line listening to those victims. They have to deal with the victims of crime if cases are not filed, if they're not prosecuted properly. And that's an issue for them and for the office. So for them, it is very important that they have a partner at their side who they can have confidence in, knowing that their cases are going to be pursued and victims are going to be served.
Thank you. Would you like a minute to rebut? I'm putting you on the spot when I ask about rebuttals because I'm just assuming that you want to.
Sure.
So you don't have to.
I know that I've visited with people and I know I've talked to them, but it's my policy not to ask for people's endorsements. That's not what I do. That's all I have to say.
Again, I apologize for putting you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
We'll move on.
It's fine.
Mr. Griffin will have first response for our next question. Here's something a lot of people don't know. Elected officials are not required to go to work. They don't have to be in the office every day. Maybe that's why so many people run for office. So you don't have to be in the office, despite the fact that you do the public's work. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. My question is how important is it for the prosecutor to maintain a presence in the office and be available to meet with the public, and how much work can be done from outside the office?
It's extremely critical to be in the office and obviously in many other places. There's been a lot of talk about being in the courtroom, and that's great, but when you're in the courtroom, you're not meeting with victims, you're not meeting with family members, you're not preparing witnesses for cases, you're not researching the law that goes into the cases you're prosecuting, you're not reviewing cases for filing. And so obviously the office turns out to be the most important part of it. Now, this is not so exciting that it makes the programs like Law and Order, but the fact is that we are doing really most of the prosecuting work in the office itself. We go execute across the street, but we're doing it in the office. Now, in terms of being there or elsewhere, it's critical to be engaged with the nonprofit groups in the community who have a stake in law enforcement types of issues. I'm involved with those, or School Safety Committee, for example, and various others. The advisory committee for the Community Corrections Facility, and all kinds of them. I will mention, by the way, I think this is important to say, that in terms of fiscal responsibility, I've made it my policy never to submit a single mileage claim, never to obtain a government cell phone, or to ask for reimbursement of my cell phone expenses. We're talking about the savings of thousands of dollars per year as I travel around our county and occasionally around our state to do the work of our county.
Mr. Eaton?
Just 1 second, please. I'm sorry, what was the question?
I don't mind repeating it at all. The question is dealing with elected officials not being required to be in the office, despite the fact that they do very valuable public work. So the question was, how important is it for the prosecutor to maintain a presence in the office and to be available to meet with the public, and how much work can be done from outside the office or from home?
Well, when I was a deputy prosecutor, I was in the office at 6:30 or 7 o'clock every morning to screen cases. And it's vital that your elected prosecutor have a consistent presence in the office. It's also vital that your elected prosecutor have a consistent presence in the actual courtroom so that people can see that they're doing the job they're supposed to be doing. There's a couple of things that were interesting that came from his answer. Two things specifically that I want to zero in on. One is this about victim services, and it's something that's very important to me. As I travel around the state of Indiana, there's a lot of these counties that have a victim service coordinator in the office, and that's somebody to assist victims, to help make sure that the office meets its statutory obligations. Currently, well, the law in Indiana, 33-14-10-5, is pretty clear that you're supposed to make sure that the victim knows that they can be present at different hearings, that they are made aware of when court proceedings have been rescheduled or canceled. When you have a caseload of approximately 1,700 cases a year, it would be very, very valuable to have a victim service coordinator to help make these things happen, to have a central point of contact in the office for crime victims. When I travel around the county, around Hamilton County, to other counties like Hamilton County, Marion County, Shelby County, et cetera, this is something that all of them have. It's, to go back to earlier, it's about priorities. We've hired more people since my opponent has been in office, but we have not fulfilled this vital need. That's something that I think that we should do in the near future. Thank you.
As a rebuttal, Mr. Hill, I think it's important to say that every prosecutor plays the role of victim advocacy and coordination. And it's something that I did from the very beginning. As I said, my very first role was as a Henry County deputy prosecutor, because otherwise I wasn't yet in office. And my primary role was to be the victim advocate for the Will Phillips family, all of whom, by the way, support my candidacy for re-election, because they know that it doesn't take someone of a particular certification or education. It takes just basic empathy. It just takes basic willingness to be there for them. And that's exactly what I did in that case. It's what I do in all of the cases that I take. Definitely it helps to have another hand. I won't deny that. And certainly we've had those discussions. I have talked already with the county council in its budget meetings about having a victim advocate, but thus far the funding's not available. The positions we've added have been tied very much to their funding sources, and they are limited. For example, to hire an additional child support caseworker took using federal grant money that is limited to the use of child support. We weren't able to hire anyone of any other kind for that money. And when you look at the other positions, I can say the same thing. And so when we have funds that are labeled or at least open enough to be able to use for a victim services coordinator, definitely we want that. But already our deputies and myself are performing that role. And let's not forget, we have a victim advocate in the Greenfield Police Department, just a couple of doors away, who serves that role very actively and is very involved, funded by a grant through an organization called Alternatives, Inc.
If I may, the victim service issue is not a sometimes thing. It's not a thing we do, occasionally. It's a statutory obligation. It's something we're supposed to do every single time. The idea that, I don't know what those other people were necessarily doing, but the idea that it could be more important than fulfilling our obligations there just does not make sense to me. It's something that it's time that we bring ourselves into the 21st century with those kind of services. The only person who would be in the best position to keep track of the court dates and fulfill the prosecutor's statutory obligations there would be, in fact, the prosecutor's office. It's something I feel very strongly about, and I look forward to bringing that service to our community as soon as possible. Thank you.
We'd very much like to have one of those people. I will say the general reaction has been not so much that that position is needed, but that that function is already being fulfilled by the current prosecutor and deputies. And the impression I'm getting is that that's a role that Mr. Eaton would prefer not to play, but it's one that I gladly play.
I'm sorry, can I respond?
1 minute.
That's simply not accurate. When I go out, and I've had about 8 or 9 different events in the community, and I'm speaking with people, and people are concerned about the prosecutor's office, when I have people coming up to me and telling me that they did not know that a case was filed when they were the victim of crime until the detective told them, it's clear that the prosecutor's office is not fulfilling that function. When I have other people tell me that they did not know that the case for which they were a victim was set for plea agreement until they actually proactively tried to call the office, it's clear that that the office is not meeting its obligations. These things need to change. Thank you.
That's not happening.
We'll stop there. Mercifully, that's all the time we have for questions. We will move on to closing statements. Mr. Griffin, you go first. 2 minutes.
Well, again, thank you all for being here tonight. Very glad to see you and appreciate your taking your time for us tonight. Again, this really is a choice between moving forward and moving backward, a choice between a candidate who has a proven track record, winning every high-profile case, improving the collection of child support, improving victim services, improving engagement with the community, adopting every initiative we can at little or no cost to the taxpayers, being actively involved in the cases that we filed, on and on and on. Mr. Eaton has spent more time as a defense attorney than he has as a prosecutor. He gives no credit to service in the military, as we've seen here tonight, and that's very disturbing to me. As we consider the future of our county, it's growing. It requires someone who's very active in that role, someone who cares very much about people. That has been demonstrated through the work I've done with the family of Officer Will Phillips and with the various other families, Lana Goebel and many others, the 117 families affected by the non-support cases that we have filed. It's been an honor to serve in this role for the past 3.5 years. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have done that. I'm glad for the work that we've done. I appreciate the chance to do it. I hope you'll continue to have us, and we would very much appreciate your support on May 6th. Thank you.
You have the last word, Mr. Eaton.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Someone can win an election, but that does not make them a prosecutor. Someone can collect a paycheck, but that does not make them a prosecutor. They can have a staff that works hard and tries to do the right thing, but that does not make them a prosecutor. They can have good ideas and intentions for things that may be useful to the public, but that does not make them a prosecutor. Until you've walked in front of a jury, looked them in the eye, and told them to hold the defendant accountable for what he's done, you're not a prosecutor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you to put a prosecutor back in the prosecutor's office. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was a very spirited hour of discussion. I hope everybody learned some insights from what you've heard for the past hour. I want to thank everybody for coming out on Good Friday to spend some time with us and to learn more about the candidates who are seeking the Republican nomination for Hancock County Prosecutor. A little over 2 weeks. It will be Election Day. It will be up to you then to decide which of these men will move on to the election in November. I'd like to thank the candidates for participating in the debate.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the Hancock County Public Library which co-sponsor this event, along with the Daily Reporter, as well as our friends at Greenfield Central High School and 9 Star Connect, who are recording this event for telecast on Monday night on the 9 Star Connect cable network, 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock, Bill, is that right? 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock. The Daily Reporter also will be posting this event to YouTube, probably the first part of next week after Mr. McKenna processes the video on Monday. Thank you again. We had a full house. It was great for everybody to come out and join our event tonight. I'm Dave Hill with the Daily Reporter. Thank you all for being here.